Right, morning everybody. Morning. So, what we're going to look at, hopefully this is an interesting subject, yes? Yes. Britain, Brexit and the Bible. I think, our lives over the last few months were completely consumed, weren't they, really? Because it didn't matter where you looked, we were seeing, all of this in front of us, weren't we? So, it didn't matter what radio station you listened to or what TV programme, pretty much, the news. It was all talking, in this country at least, about the potential of Britain leaving Europe. And at work, I work in financial services down in London, and all of the guys who are my bosses are extremely wealthy guys, really focused in on this, and they were absolutely convinced, totally convinced that Britain was going to stay in Europe. There wasn't a shadow of an inkling of a doubt in anybody's mind that I spoke to down in London that said that we were going to leave. And it was absolutely shock of the century when we did come out. They were completely bowled over by this. It totally took them by surprise. And of course this is how it was announced.
I hereby give notice that I have certified the following. The total number of votes cast in favour of leave was 17,410,742. This means that the UK has voted to leave the European Union.
Sterling, lowest level in 31 years.
Which is down some 12.6%.
The British people have voted to leave the European Union, and their will must be respected. I think the country requires fresh leadership to take it in this direction. We should aim to have a new Prime Minister in place by the start of the Conservative Party conference in October.
So this was big news, wasn't it? This is like a political earthquake, and of course it isn't just Britain that was interested in this. I don't think there was a nation on the planet that wasn't reporting headline news about Britain leaving Europe, do you? I looked at, not every single country on earth, but I looked at many of the headlines the following day, and I couldn't find a single solitary newspaper anywhere that didn't have Britain leaving Europe as their number one headline. So this isn't just a little event to do with Britain, and really nobody's that interested. It's headline news around the planet. So what we're going to do this morning is have a look with Bible in hand why, what God says about these events. Well, does he say anything about these events to start with? We're going to have a look at that. But here's something that is quite interesting. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of John Thomas. John Thomas arguably was the very first Christadelphian, because he started discovering what we call the truth, and that was back in the mid-1800s. And in 1848, John Thomas wrote a book called Elpis Israel. And in that book, he actually wrote that Britain cannot be included among them. And by them, he was talking about what he saw as the coming Holy Roman Empire that was going to be resurrected in Europe. And because obviously Europe didn't exist, did it, in 1848 as it does now, but he said Britain is not going to be part of this new European thing that's going to form in the future. That's pretty amazing that, 150 or so years ago he said Britain won't be part of Europe. In 1981, in a publication called Milestones, now who was it who wrote that one at that point? It was Brother Graham Pierce at that point. So Graham Pierce wrote, Britain will separate from Europe. That's pretty amazing that he saw that. In 1990, in a book written by Paul Billington called Guardians of Israel and Arabia, all these Christadelphians, he wrote, Britain's eventual exit from Europe is a certainty. That's quite amazing, isn't it? And you know something? These people were pilloried for their belief that Britain would leave Europe, because bearing in mind, back in these years, in these decades, we were pretty meshed in, weren't we? We'd voted to go in the 1970s, and yet they were saying all the way through, right the way through, non-stop, that Britain would eventually come out of Europe. How did they know that? They knew it because of their understanding of the Bible. They weren't, they didn't sit there and just imagine this in their own minds and just dream this up. It was their understanding of the Bible that helped them to come to this conclusion. So that's quite amazing that they said that, and we're going to look at some of the things. To be honest with you, we're not going to really look back so much as look at really what happens next. But actually, I just wanted to put this quote up. This is from Daniel chapter 4, verse 17, and it's a really important principle, which is that the Most High rules over the kingdoms of the world. He gives them to anyone he chooses. And in fact, I'm not going to play it, but I might send you the link. We were on, the Christadelphians were interviewed on BBC Nottingham just before the referendum. And they were asking us our opinion on voting, and we don't vote in the elections. And they were really interested in why, out of all the religions, Christadelphians didn't vote in this referendum. And it was Brother Vic Orcott who was interviewed, and he actually quoted this verse on that radio, along with some other verses as well that explain why we don't vote. And the lady, the BBC radio presenter, at the end of it said that was a really fantastic explanation as to why Christadelphians don't get involved. So really, where we're coming from is, all this stuff that's happening in the world, we are extremely interested in it because the Bible talks about these events, but the reason we don't vote is because it's God himself that is controlling the political and the leaders of the earth. That's what it says. So if we voted, let's say, to stay in Europe, if that's what we thought, or to come out of Europe, if that's what we thought, we might actually be voting against God. Because actually God might want a different outcome, and who wants to be voting against God? Now, God needs somebody to vote, we understand, because God brings about the leaders that he wants. But from our point of view, we are pilgrims in this world. And anybody know what the word pilgrim means? A sojourner is a good, more old-fashioned word perhaps, but yeah, sojourner. It really means a resident foreigner. Christadelphians see themselves as pilgrims, which means a resident foreigner. And do you know something? Foreigners living in this country, could they vote in the referendum? Answer, no. They couldn't. And therefore, nor could we, because we are resident foreigners. And that is the reason, the thinking behind that is, of course, is that we're waiting for Jesus to come back to this earth and establish a kingdom upon this earth of which he is going to rule. And so that's the kingdom that, if anything, we would vote for, but you don't need to vote for it because Jesus is going to come back and establish his kingdom. So that's just a little bit of an introduction. We're going to just look at four key questions here. First of all is, where is Britain mentioned, if anywhere, in the Bible? We're just going to spend 5-10 minutes on that. You could spend an hour on any of these questions, to be fair. So where is Britain in the Bible? Is Brexit indicated at all in the Bible? Is Brexit indicated, in other words, is there any sort of sign that we might be coming out of Europe in the Bible? And these are the big questions. What happens next for Britain? And what happens next for Europe? And we think the Bible actually gives us some indication of that. Just as we could see Britain coming out of Europe, we can also see what actually rolls on next. So let's cut to the chase then. Where is Britain in the Bible? Well, you can of course read the Bible as much as you like, and you won't read the name Britain. And that's really because the Bible was written a long, long, long time before the name of Britain was even thought of. So where is Britain in the Bible? Well, I believe, and I'm going to give you some evidence for this, that every single time that you read the name Tarshish in the Bible, you are reading about Britain. Okay? Here is the evidence for that. In Ezekiel 27 verse 3, we read about this place called Tyre. It says, "Say unto Tyre, O thou that art situated at the entry of the sea, which art a merchant of the people for many isles." This is sort of old-fashioned language, but basically this is saying there's this place called Tyre that goes around trading with many, many, many different people. And at the time Ezekiel was writing, anybody know how long ago that was? When was Ezekiel writing? Roughly.
About 2,500 years ago.
Let's say that. It's around about 2,500 years ago. At the time Ezekiel was writing, about 2,500 years ago, there was a city called Tyre. And does anybody know where Tyre was based? It was the capital city of a particular nation. Anybody know? Phoenicia. So Tyre was the capital city of a place called Phoenicia, which if you went, which country would we have to fly to go and visit there today? Lebanon is the right answer. So if we got a plane to Lebanon, we would be going to ancient Phoenicia. In fact, there's still a city called Tyre right now in Lebanon. But Tyre now is a little run-down little place compared to what it was here. It was an amazing city, trading all over the place. They got an immense navy, incredible in terms of how they traded, and the Bible talks about it. And there's a reason why the Bible talks about it, which we haven't got time to go into, but suffice to say, there's Tyre. Now, in Ezekiel 27, if you get a chance, have a read of it when you get home, but the whole chapter is full of who Tyre traded with. And there's nation after nation after nation after nation after nation. And each nation, it says what Tyre traded for that nation for. In other words, what goods had that nation got that it was interested in. And in verse 12 it says that Tarshish was Tyre's merchant by reason of the multitude of all kinds of riches. And here's what Tarshish was renowned for trading with the Phoenicians with. It was silver, iron, tin and lead. They traded in thy fairs. So wherever Tarshish is, it was renowned for trading in silver, iron, tin and lead with the Tyrians, with the people from Tyre, the ancient Phoenicians. So as we've said, there's a map. Here's a modern map. So there's Lebanon. Israel's down here. Here's the Mediterranean, of course. And there is this green strip of land here was Phoenicia, and their capital city was here, Tyre. And what they did, the reason that they were so successful at trading is that Tyre and Phoenicia didn't conquer lands, they traded with them and they set up colonies all over the then known world. And these green lines all over the place are where the Tyrians paddled their boats. They went everywhere. And they set up colonies in northern Africa, in southern Europe, all over the place. And they traded. Now have a look. One of these green lines comes all the way along here and through Gibraltar and all the way around here, and lo and behold, there's Britain. And look what it says that they traded with Britain for. Tin. Tin is actually one of the big clues. As do you remember it said that Tarshish traded for silver, iron, tin and lead. And the rarest of all of those metals in the ancient world was actually tin. It was very, very rare to find tin. But the Phoenicians did find tin, and they found it and traded for it with Britain. And here is a website. This is called, I forget what the actual website is. I think it's called, it's carthagetop.com. This is not a biblical website. This is a factual, historical website about the Phoenicians. And on this particular page, it's got Britain, Phoenicia's secret treasure. And down here, interesting little paragraph, it says the deposits of tin in the ancient world were usually small and not very plentiful. The Phoenicians discovered the tin deposits of the British Isles through their own exploring and seeking out of new products and markets for them. They kept the knowledge of the Cornish tin mines a closely guarded secret so that they could control trade in the metal and charge a high price for it. And you know something, it wasn't just tin. Actually, they traded for silver, iron, tin and lead. And do you know how I know that? Because of this. This is a publication. This is called Her Majesty's Stationery Office Publication on Mining. And in this it says that the principal economic minerals of southwest England are, of course, as if like we should all know, tin and copper, considerable amounts of ores of lead, zinc, silver, arsenic, antimony, sulphur, iron, manganese have also been raised. The date of the discovery of tin in the west of England is not known, but it was being produced about 2,500 years ago. Bang on the time that Ezekiel was saying that the Tyrians and Phoenicians were trading with Britain for this very substance, for this metal. What did it say in Ezekiel 27? It said, down here, look, silver, iron, tin and lead. Here we've got tin, lead, silver, iron. There is no other country whatsoever that at the time of the Phoenicians was renowned for actually mining those metals. None. So therefore, the Phoenicians were definitely trading with Britain, and therefore Britain must be Tarshish. Angie and myself went down, well, we go down quite often to this neck of the woods. Where's this? Well, it tells you it's St Michael's Mount. This is St Michael's Mount down in Cornwall. And I just picked up this little brochure while we were down there, and you can't really read that writing, but this is it blown up. It says, in ancient times, the Phoenicians traded for tin and copper here. This is just on a normal sort of guide that you get when you're walking around the place. So we're not making this up. This is quite interesting. I only found this out quite recently. This is a very, very ancient book. Well, I think it's ancient because it was published in 1707, which to me makes it pretty old. And it's really hard to quite read this because all of the S's are written as F's. So, but this is called The Present State of Great Britain and Ireland, written by that very ancient-looking man, and I've forgotten his name. But in this, and it's basically looking at the history of Britain. But in here, there was a really interesting little comment in this book. It says, as to the origin of the word Britain, there are many conjectures and derivations, but none so natural as that of the learned Bocart, I don't know what his name is. He says the Phoenicians trading frequently here for tin called the place Baratanac. That means, or that is, the land of tin, or the tin country, which word was actually changed by the Greeks to Britannia. And from Britannia, we get Britain. So the Phoenicians even called this the land of tin, Baratanac, which is where we get Britannia, which is where we get Britain, and hence, where we've got our current name from. The Phoenicians actually gave us our name. How amazing is that? According to this. And looking at a number of sources, this is not some crazy idea. If you dig around, that is where many people do believe that name came from. Because people could see that when they read the Bible that Tarshish was Britain, the books by Christadelphians mainly started to be written about the role of Britain in Bible prophecy. And this guy is Brother John Thomas, who was the first Christadelphian that I've already mentioned. And in this sort of, it's sort of a book, but it's a collection of his writings basically that was put together. And it was called The Destiny of the British Empire as Revealed in the Scriptures. And this was written in 1871 by this man. And look what in fact the whole publication talks about how Britain is identified with ancient Tarshish. So this is back in 1871. He'd written Elpis Israel many years before that, which also identified Britain as Tarshish. And you know something? I honestly think we're one of the only religions to have really made this link for some reason. There are some actually in America that have started to make this link actually in more recent years. but pretty much, for some reason I don't know why, we're probably one of the few that have actually locked down and understood the role of Britain in the Bible. So I think Britain is mentioned in the Bible. In fact, what I would do, and what I've done in my Bible, in pencil, is every time it says Tarshish, I've just written next to it Britain, every single time. And it makes sense more as you're reading through it. So, okay, so there is Britain being mentioned in the Bible, but what else can we find out with that knowledge in mind? I don't know if any of you have read this chapter before, or very often, but this is a really interesting chapter. And it links together Tyre and Tarshish in quite an interesting way. So in Isaiah chapter 23, which Phil read the last couple of verses for us, it basically is talking about ancient history, but it comes right bang up to date. So let me try and explain what this chapter's about. I've done a whole talk just on this one chapter, and I'm going to try and get through it in a few minutes, what really should probably take on its own another hour. So Isaiah 23 starts off, and it's talking about the burden of Tyre. A burden is it's a problem, it's a weight, it's a load, it's a real problem. So Tyre's got a problem, and notice in the next bit it says, "Howl, ye ships of Tarshish, for it is laid waste." And what this chapter's starting to talk about is a very significant time in history when this amazing trading capital city of Tyre came to a complete and utter cataclysmic end. And the rest of the chapter explains what happens thereafter. And the reason that you notice that Tyre and Britain are already linked together in this chapter. So in other words, Tyre is laid waste, and because Tyre is laid waste, the ships of Tarshish are howling. I mean, this is symbolic language, isn't it? Because we were trading with Tyre, it was like one of our major trading partners has now stopped trading. Our own ships were upset about that because we had not got a trading partner any longer with Tyre. That's basically what we're saying here. And what is really interesting is these verses talk about Tyre coming to an end. But when Tyre has come to an end, look at this in verse 6. Talking about Tyre, it says, "Pass ye over to Tarshish." Pass ye over to Tarshish. So this ancient Tyrian city comes to an end, and somehow or other passes over to Britain. How does a capital city that's been destroyed actually up sticks and shift itself over to Britain? Well, we'll have a look at that in just a minute. Look, it says here, "Carry her afar off to sojourn." So in other words, you're going to move a long, long way from where you are now. Tyre, when you've come to an end, you're going to shift lock, stock and barrel over to Tarshish. So this first bit is talking about ancient Tyre being destroyed. This next bit is talking about Tyre is passing over to Britain. These few verses are basically God warning modern Tyre, and this little bit is modern day Tyre, which we're going to have a look at in just a second. So just put that in your mind just for a second. We're going to go back and just deal with this yellow block first, then we'll deal with this blue block, and then we'll deal with this green block in just a minute. So, Tyre came to a dramatic end. And in fact, this is basically only from a few years ago. This is back in 2007 in the Daily Telegraph, and on May the 14th in Live Science. The headlines were quite interesting because it's all about Tyre. Mystery solved, how Alexander the Great defeated Tyre. And all of this was taking place in 332 BC. So Tyre came to an end in 332 BC. And what happened was, a guy called, have you all heard of Alexander the Great? He was basically heading up the Greek Empire. And Alexander the Great conquered many, many, many places. And he wanted to conquer Tyre. And he did. And Tyre was based on a little island out to sea, out here, look. And he basically came along, and the Tyrians felt pretty protected on their island here. It's quite a big island. And what he did, he got all this rubble from the remains of a previous city that they had here, and he pushed it into the sea, built a huge causeway, went across onto Tyre, and basically flattened it and destroyed it. And that's when Tyre came to an end. And this is a modern day picture of what it looks like. So you can still see where the causeway was built, because now it's just normal land. Are you with me? So this was ancient Tyre out here. So Tyre did come to an end. It's fact, it's history, it's in encyclopedias. It came to an end in 332 BC. But what did it say next? It said that Tyre would pass over to where? So here's Tyre, and somehow or other it's going to fly over like this and end up in Tarshish. Okay, fine. How does that happen then? How does a city shift from one place to the other? Well, here's some interesting facts about Tyre, and some of them I've already told you. The first thing is, it was the capital city. It was the capital city of Phoenicia. It was full of merchants and kings. In fact, the Bible mentions quite a few of the kings of Tyre. One of them was called Hiram, which is mentioned in Chronicles. He was best friends with King David and with Solomon. So it was full of merchants and kings, very rich. It ended up being on this island out to sea. They're very proud people, traded with many nations. The key thing with these people was that they set up colonies all around the then known world. They had a huge navy. They started off being very pro-Jewish. They actually liked the Jews to start with, but at the end of their time, they turned against the Jews. And you know what? That's why the Bible talks about Tyre. And that's why God brought them to an end. It's God that said that I'm going to bring Tyre to an end. And God brought Tyre to an end because they turned against the Jews. We didn't look at this, but in Isaiah 23 it also says that the new Tyre would be associated with a river. This has got to pass over to Britain, yes? It says Tyre will come to an end. All of that will come to an end, but reappear in Britain. Is that not what it says? That's what it says. Now somebody tell me, is there any place in Britain that might tick any of those boxes?
London.
There's only one place, and that is London. You see, Tyre did pass over. It's not physically meaning all the bricks and stones were moved, but what it was passed over to Britain. Everything that it stood for, everything that it did, passed over to Britain. And London actually fit perfectly, do you know, with all of those things. Absolutely every single one of them. Only just on a far grander and greater and bigger scale. So here is the map of the British Empire. What did the British Empire do? What was it famous for doing? Colonising and trade. We didn't go around and literally conquer everything. We weren't going to war with all these nations. We set up colonies all around the world. This is the largest empire ever on planet Earth. No empire has ever covered as much landmass as the British Empire. 1/4 of the surface of planet Earth came under the British Empire. And a huge proportion of the world's population as well. We set up colonies, and we did it through trade. It was exactly what the Tyrians used to do, but just on a fantastically bigger scale. This is out of Encyclopaedia Britannica. British Empire, a worldwide system of dependencies, colonies, protectorates and other territories that over a span of some 3 centuries was brought under the sovereignty of the Crown of Great Britain and the administration of the British government based in London. How amazing is that? It's exactly what the Tyrians did. Anybody know who this is? Well, this again, I keep forgetting I've put you the answers on the screen. So here's Queen Victoria. Now this is in 1897, pretty much at the peak of the British Empire. We are now pretty much ruling the world. We've, well, a lot of it. And at her Diamond Jubilee in 1897, there was a very, very interesting poem that Rudyard Kipling, the court poet, actually wrote, and it was read out to the Queen on this day, in 1897, at the peak of the empire. And I just want to read a couple of verses from this because it is absolutely amazing. Now, you've got to remember that Britain was a very, very God-fearing place back then. It certainly isn't now, is it? But back then, it doesn't matter where you go, you'll see a church built, won't you? We went to Whitby last week, and even in our tiny village that we stayed in, which had got, how many houses were in it? About 10 houses. There's still a church in amongst those 10 houses. It doesn't matter where you go, you see a church. Would that happen now? If we demolished them all and started again, would all these churches spring back up? You wouldn't see a single one. You'd probably see lots of nightclubs instead. But back then, Britain was very, very, very religious. Now look at what Rudyard Kipling said to this Queen. You might have heard of it. It's called Lest We Forget. And this poem is all about the danger of forgetting God. God of our fathers, known of old, Lord of our far-flung battle line, beneath whose awful hand we hold dominion over palm and pine. Lord God of hosts, be with us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget. I mean, bearing in mind he's saying all this at the peak of it all. He says we've got dominion over palm and pine, we're stretching our empire, but if we forget you, we could be in trouble. This is the poem to the Queen. The tumult and the shouting dies, the captains and the kings depart, still stands thine ancient sacrifice. What's that talking about? Jesus. And humble and a contrite heart. Lord God of hosts, be with us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget. Far called our navies melt away, on dune and headland sinks the fire. Lo, all our pomp of yesterday is one with Nineveh and Tyre. Judge of the nations, spare us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget. And so it goes on. For heathen heart that puts her trust in reeking tube and iron shard, or valiant dust that builds on dust, and guarding cause not thee to guard, for frantic boast and foolish word, thy mercy on thy people, Lord, Amen. This is what he's saying to the Queen. We might be at the pinnacle of it all, and they were, but if we forget, will become like Tyre. Do you know something? Do you think Britain did forget? Do you think Britain has forgot? No. It categorically has thrown God full scale into the bin. The churches have become nightclubs. The churches are deserted. The people have rejected God. We can't teach children anymore about, we're not a Christian country really, are we, when all is said and done? They know more about the Quran when they leave school than they'd ever know about the Bible. We have wholesale rejected God. Now, here's the interesting thing. In this Isaiah 23, God explains what would happen to modern day Tyre, this Tyre that exists in Britain. He says the Lord will visit Tyre. This isn't the ancient Tyre because we're later on in the chapter. It's sequential, so we're at the point of talking about London. You may as well cross that out and write London, because that's what it's talking about. The Lord will visit London, and she will return to her wages, and will prostitute herself with all the kingdoms of the world on the face of the earth. So somehow or other, God says that London is actually going to become like a prostitute. And actually, is going to, and it's all to do with money. It's all to do with wages. It's all about cash now. We're going to make money. And it doesn't matter what we do, we're going to make money, and, to hell, to coin a phrase, with all of our principles about God. We are going to do this. And so Britannia, there's the image of Britannia, God said would turn into a harlot. A harlot literally does anything for cash, doesn't she? Anything for cash, I'll do it. That's what that is. And Britain, God says, London would eventually become exactly the same. Now, has Britain done that? Well, we've already said that Britain has done that. Let me show you one of the key things that has caused one of the major slides in Britain away from God. And this might come as a surprise to you what it was. But I think it was this. Britain, you remember when Tony Blair came to power in 1996-97? And when Blair came into power, one of the first things that he did was say, we're going to sign up to the European Human Rights Act. Because basically it was like, we're all part of Europe, we need to bring in European laws, the human rights into our country. And you might think, well, surely that was a good thing to bring in human rights acts into this country. And you know what? It caused from that point onwards the steepest decline in morality in this country that this country has ever seen. And that is because the European Court of Human Rights is utterly and totally godless. It cares nothing for God. It cares about man, and man being the top dog, and man being right, and my rights overcome your rights, and I've got a right to do this, and I've got a right to do that. And here's some of the stuff that's happened since 1998. In 1981, the European Court of Human Rights ruled in Dudgeon versus the UK that the sodomy ban violated Article 8 of the ECHR because everyone has the right to respect for his private and family life. Do you know something? In 1981, it was a crime and it was illegal to be a homosexual until this point, when the European Court of Human Rights said, actually, no, you have a right to do whatever you want to do. They don't turn to the Bible and say, what does the Bible say is right or wrong when it comes to human relations with human relations? No. The Human Rights Act started overriding these things. In 1997, so now this is when we've signed up to the Human Rights Act, the European Court of Human Rights found that differing ages of consent for gay sex were discriminatory. So they equalised it. In the year 2000, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that the Royal Navy had breached the human rights of personnel by firing them after discovering their sexuality. In 2002, the European Court of Human Rights ruled in favour of trans women, Christine Goodwin, who was denied the right to marry in the UK. So this now started the wheels in motion back in 2002 for men to marry men and women to marry women. It was the European Court of Human Rights changing what we had had for millennia, really, in this country, or at least 1,000 years. It said, actually, this isn't right. We won't allow this. The European Court of Human Rights says, no, you've got to allow it. We've signed up to it. We say we better do it. Why? Because we're making all this money from Europe. We don't want to fall out with Europe too much. We want to sort of stay on side because we make all this money. If it means we've got to do something a bit that we don't really find that tasteful, well, let's just do it all the same. It's not just about sexual things. A ruling in the European Court of Human Rights in 1998 found that a stepfather had breached a boy's human rights by physically punishing him. This was if you read up about the case, this was a man who had smacked his child on the bottom in a supermarket, and it all went to court because somebody said that he shouldn't have smacked this child on the bum, and now it's actually illegal to smack a child. That isn't what the Bible says, by the way. We're not talking here about, child abuse. This is not child abuse, but the European Court of Human Rights has got its own decision on that. The European Court of Human Rights ruled that a company that sacked a man for smoking cannabis at work was wrong. They said it was no worse than smoking cigarettes and that the company had breached his human rights. This is what is permeating the laws of our country now. Have a listen to David Cameron. This is just, I think it was about a year or two ago.
Since I recorded last year's message, there has been one huge, historic change in Britain. The institution of marriage is now open to all. Whether you're a man and a man, a woman and a woman, or a woman and a man. Your love for one another is equal in the eyes of the law. Since the Same-Sex Couples Act came into law in March, couples across the country have been demonstrating their love and their commitment by tying the knot. This would not have been possible without the support of so many people who are at Pride today. So thank you. You have made history. I'm immensely proud to be the Prime Minister of the country, which is, and this is official, the best place in Europe to be gay, lesbian, bisexual or transgender. But that doesn't mean our job is done. We cannot be...
See, he said some interesting things there. He said he was proud about this. Where's Cameron now? Where is he now?
Soon beyond the door.
Do you know what? On his final speech, well, it's not quite his final speech, but in the day after the referendum, when he was in Parliament and he said, I'm going to stand down, that was what he talked about. One of his proudest moments, he said, of the biggest achievement that I've made is a man being able to marry a man and a woman being able to marry a woman. Do you know something? The Bible talks about judgment coming on proud people. Have a look at this. Isaiah chapter 2. The lofty looks of man shall be humbled, and the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. For the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon every one that is proud and lofty, and upon every one that is lifted up, and he shall be brought low. And then it lists out some judgments coming on different places specifically. And one of them in verse 16 is on all the ships of Tarshish. The ships are symbolic of the power of a country. It's how we promote our power, isn't it, around the world, using our ships. Without a ship, you can't promote your power. So this is actually code for saying that the power of Britain is going to be judged for all those who've got themselves puffed up and proud and gone against God's ways. Do we think that's happening in this country? And you see the turmoil that we're in. We've given up every single solitary last principle to be to have brought in European ways into this country. Every single last one of them, all for cash. The argument for staying in Europe wasn't about anything other than money, wasn't it? Did you hear that? You were going to be £4,000 a year worse off. You're going to have less of this. You're going to have less of this. It was just about the money. That's all it was about. And at work, that's all it's about. It's the money. But the very last verse that Phil read of this chapter, that is talking about modern day London becoming like a harlot, says, in the end, her profits will be given to the Lord, and her wealth will not be hoarded. Now, what does that sound like to you? So Britain's going to get immensely wealthy, like ancient Tyre, but her profits will be given to the Lord. Her wealth will not be hoarded. What does that sound like? Doesn't it? Yeah. So, I mean, God doesn't need us to transfer our bank account into his bank account because he hasn't got a bank account. This can't be saying all her profits are going to go to God in a physical way. All the money gets shoveled over to God and he thinks, oh, I've got all this money. It's got to be talking really about this. Her wealth will come to nothing. The wealth will not be hoarded. The wealth is going to come to nothing. You've put your trust in wealth. You're going to get none of it at the end. In effect, it's gone back to God. It all comes to nothing. That's how I would see that. And of course, interestingly, now we've come out of Europe, there's a potential chain reaction here that is quite amazing. And we are starting to see, so UK stripped of final AAA rating. So we have got the best financial rating that you can get from any credit agency up to Brexit. Brexit happens and we've been stripped of our most secure financial rating. That has an impact. Now we might not have, look, it's only been 2 weeks since Brexit. The world hasn't fallen apart. But I'm telling you now that there are amazing things still to happen in regard to wealth as we go forward from here. We haven't seen anything yet. What we have seen is the pound collapsing down to levels not seen for about 31 years. And again, we haven't seen the impacts of that yet. Sterling falling has got major implications. But actually, let me show you something else that's coming. Because Brexit is a spark for something far, far bigger. Do you know something? Isaiah 23 finishes exactly like that. And what we didn't read was the next chapter. And the next chapter begins like this. Verse 1, look, the Lord is about to destroy the earth and make it a vast wasteland. He devastates the surface of the earth and scatters the people. Priests and lay people, servants and masters, maids and mistresses, buyers and sellers, lenders and borrowers, bankers and debtors, none will be spared. The earth will be completely emptied and looted. The Lord has spoken. Next verse. Can you see how there's got to be some significance, hasn't there? I mean, we go from the end of chapter 23, talking about London hoarding all this money, becoming rich, but becoming like a harlot. Then God says, you're not going to keep it, or it's all going to go. Next verse says, look, I'll tell you what I'm about to do. You're about to see this happen. The whole world is going to fall from a financial... Because this sounds like financial collapse. Does it to me? Does it to you? You see, what is going to happen is this, and the Bible tells us about this. Britain divorcing itself from Europe is going to cause a domino collapse of the European system. So this graphic here shows it. This was in an article that's saying this whole Brexit thing could be the beginning of the end of Europe. The end of the EU. Brussels fears devastating domino effect of Brexit. And what that will end up doing is obviously impacting around the world. Now, I'm not just saying it's just Brexit and it's just Europe that's going to create all of this mess, but it's got to be something, hasn't it, that could well spark off, a bit like a domino effect, that creates this. So in the last 5 minutes, I want to just have a look and see what basically could be happening next.
Chapter 2. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them,
I have had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means.
Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said,
I have found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means.
The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar,
Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?
Daniel replied,
No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you lay on your bed are these. As you were lying there, O king, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than other living men, but so that you, O king, may know the interpretation, and that you may understand what went through your mind. You looked, O king, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were broken to pieces at the same time and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king.
So Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and Nebuchadnezzar was a king of Babylon, and God gave him a vision about the future. And the vision that he gave him about the future was in a symbolic form. It was of a statue with a head of gold and chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron and feet part iron and part clay. And all of this is in Daniel chapter 2, and there's the words on the screen. And Daniel goes on and explains in the book of Daniel that the head of gold represented the Babylonian Empire. And the Medes and the Persians represented the next empire that would come. And then he said, after the Medes and the Persians, there'd be the Greek Empire. That's where Alexander the Great fitted in. And after the Greek Empire would come the Roman Empire, which is symbolic of these iron legs. But after the Iron Empire of Rome, there's a final kingdom, it says, that appears on earth called Europe. Well, he doesn't call it Europe. He just says it's the feet. Does anybody remember what the feet are made of? Iron and clay. So in other words, the Roman Empire was made of iron, and the European Empire down here is made of iron and clay. And we read that. You can just about see their feet on the screen there. So have a look at this. It says, so this is talking about an empire that exists at the very end of time. It says, the feet and toes you saw were a combination of iron and baked clay, showing that this kingdom would be divided. Like iron mixed with clay, it will have some of the strength of iron, but while some parts of it will be as strong as iron, others will be as weak as clay. This mixture of iron and clay also shows that these kingdoms will try to strengthen themselves by forming alliances with each other through intermarriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron and clay do not mix. During the reigns of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed or conquered. It will crush all these kingdoms into nothingness, and it will stand forever. So basically what we're reading here is at the very end of time there's going to be a sort of empire that is not, well, it's a divided empire. It's nations that are trying to come together, but they are divided. We know this is something to do with Europe, because where was the Roman Empire predominantly based? In Europe. So the iron is all to do with Europe, but now we've got something called clay being mixed in with it, and so the whole thing doesn't gel together. And it says, in the reign of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, and that's what we're on the brink of right now. But you notice what they do here. It says that the iron and the clay, they try and strengthen themselves by forming alliances with each other through intermarriage. This is a modern version, but I think it's a good way of looking at this. So in other words, you've got all these nations, and what they try and do is overcome their differences through intermarriage. In other words, let's mix ourselves together. Does this ring any bells? So what does all this represent? Well, the feet, we believe, is talking about Europe, a continuation of the Roman Empire. Iron, if you look in Revelation 2, verse 27, is all to do with the strength of rulership. Iron is always to do with the strength of rulership. And that's what Rome originally was. It was run by a Caesar, it was a dictator, it ruled really strongly, and that's why it lasted for so long. The clay, though, represents people. It represents the power of the people. If you look in many passages in the Bible, Isaiah 64 verse 8 is one of them, it tells you that people are the same in God's sight as clay. Why do you think that is? Because we're made from clay, we're made from the dust of the earth. So now we've got the strength of rulership mixing in with people. And the two things aren't mixing together. The Bible says that there's going to be this sort of intermarriage, this mingling. We're going to try and mix people together, but actually none of it actually works. They don't actually mingle properly, just as iron and clay don't mingle. And the whole thing eventually falls apart because it remains divided. And at this time, Jesus Christ returns back to the earth to establish a kingdom that will never fail. And we can see, can't we, that it's the power of the people that's disrupting what Europe really wants. They're trying to rule like a dictator, because we don't really elect the people in Europe, do we, to rule us? Nobody elects any of them, really, who actually do the ruling. But the people, the clay, through like the referendum that we've just had, is able to bring the whole thing crashing down. Here's an interesting thing here. So, have you heard of the Schengen Agreement? The Schengen Agreement means I don't need a passport to go from any of these European countries into another European country. I can just move around as I want to. There's no borders anymore. That's what the Bible says is intermarriage, is intermingling. You can go where you like. Let's mix the races up, Because if we mix the races up, then actually there's no more nations anymore. They're not defined as nations. We've mixed, the Polish will mix in with us and we'll mix in with them, and eventually Britain doesn't have its own identity anymore. That is the European project. But it doesn't work, because the people eventually, they still stick together. They don't really intermingle. And eventually, like with Britain, they react against it. Now look at this, Brexit contagion. UK vote raises fears of a tsunami of EU membership referendums. So you can see that other European countries on the edges might also say, let's vote against this. We don't want to be part of it either. Britain's sorted it out. We're going to clear off as well. Brexit to spark wildfire contagion across Europe after Brussels' handling of refugee crisis. That was a recent headline as well. Anybody know what this is? It's the famous painting of the Tower of Babel. And you know something? The European project is based on this very, very thing. It's about, because what happened was, well, let me just play you a very short little video clip, because it tells you what happened back in Babel.
After the flood, Noah and his family gave thanks and offered sacrifices to God for preserving them. God told Noah to go and multiply and fill the earth. Noah's family flourished and multiplied, but they did not spread all over the earth. Instead, they moved down from the mountains of Ararat and settled in the plain of Shinar and dreamed of building a great city. Come, let us build a city and a tower to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves, and not be scattered over the face of the whole earth. God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, looked down upon them, and saw the city and the tower they were building. They are united and speak the same language. Now nothing they imagine to do will be impossible for them. So God went down and confused their language, so they could not understand each other. And God scattered them over the face of the earth, and they stopped building the city.
So you see, Babel was where all these people were speaking one language, doing this amazing project. God says, I'm going to bring it to an end by scattering you into different nations through changing your language. So Europe, with all its different nations and different languages, is part of what God designed. He designed people to live in different countries. What Europe is doing is trying to reverse that process. And it makes it absolutely clear that this is what it's trying to do. So there's the ancient painting of Babel. And here is the EU Parliament building in Strasbourg. And it's actually modelled exactly on that design. And we're not just making this up, because if you go there, they give you a guide that says this building is based on that. And they say that because what they're trying to do is mix all the races back together so that we're one great big super block of nations again. That's what Europe's trying to do. God says it ain't going to work because iron and clay don't mix. The people will bring it down. Here's a poster, a European poster. Europe, many tongues, one voice. They actually put it on an official poster that we are Babel. This is what we're doing. What do you think God thinks to this? Not a lot. He doesn't like their laws. He doesn't like what they're doing. So what is happening next for Europe, I believe, is this. We have paddled off. Judgment's coming our way as well. But Europe falls over a cliff. Literally, the thing starts breaking down. And in fact, when we got back from on holiday on the doormat, this was on when we got back on Friday, there on the doormat was Time magazine, which has scanned in the fall of Europe, why Brexit is just the beginning. So I spent all week putting this talk together, and there on the doormat when you get in is that. How amazing is that? Europe is divided, and it will sink. There is a very final bit to this story though, and that is it will collapse and Jesus will come back at the point when it has crumbled apart. That's when Jesus is coming. But, believe it or not, after the return of Jesus, there will be, coming out of something called a bottomless pit, this rather horrible looking beast, and there's a final Babel coming together of some nations to stand against Jesus when he actually comes back. That's supposed to be a seven-horned, a seven-headed horrible beast, because Revelation 17 says that there will be a revived Holy Roman Empire called the Beast that will ascend out of the bottomless pit. We haven't seen this yet. This comes out of the ruins of the divided up EU that we see at the minute. And it says that 10 kings who have not yet risen to power will come to power. So there's going to be 10 nations that come out of the ruins of the EU who are going to come together. They will be appointed to their kingdoms for one brief moment to reign with the beast. They will all agree to give him their power and authority, and together they will go to war against the Lamb, which is Jesus. But the Lamb will defeat them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and his called and chosen and faithful ones will be with him. So what I'm saying is Europe's going to crumble apart. Jesus comes at the point when it's crumbled apart. But at some point afterwards, 10 nations who are still there come together. They form a bloc, and this bloc goes to war against Jesus, but Jesus defeats them. This is pretty bad news, isn't it? People are going to fight against Jesus when he's back, but not only against Jesus, who else?
The saints.
The saints, us, those who are called and chosen and faithful. This must be after the judgment. This is after the judgment when Jesus is here. This horrible beast, this European Holy Roman Empire, will come against Jesus and fight against him. The Holy Roman Empire, by the way, covered much of Central Europe and was controlled mainly by Germany. That is the bloc that will rise up out of the ashes and make war against Jesus. Now you think I'm dreaming? Look at this. This was June the 29th. When was that? A couple of days ago. European superstate to be unveiled. EU nations to be morphed into one post-Brexit. EU wants to be an empire. Brussels hopes to expand its influence as far as Asia and Africa. These headlines are happening now. So we're going to see this happen potentially, but maybe all of this actually really does happen after Jesus has come back. So I think the Brexit vote's massively significant. It's our, pulling away. Judgment, though, is going to come on us for the way we've treated God. There's no doubt about that. But it's obviously going to lead to the fall of Europe. Ultimately, a European Union superstate comes after that at some point. But we're on the very brink of things happening, because remember Isaiah 24 said, look what I'm about to do. I'm about to judge the whole world. And that came just at the very end of the previous chapter, talking about Britain and its involvement with Europe potentially coming to an end. So hopefully that is sort of interesting. I've gone on for exactly 1 hour looking at the clock on there. But, it is a sign, I believe, of momentous things that are about to happen. And I think we all feel that deep down as well. So thanks for listening.